Ethical criticisms. One of the criticisms of postmodernism is that it encourages thinking about literature divorced from the social and political context of its production. It is at the wake of such criticisms that literary studies responded with an ethical intervention. Ethics can be defined as the moral principles that guide behavior or conduct. So, in the context of literary theory, ethics means considering how literature might shape these moral principles. Ethical critics focus their attention on literary works that focus questions on morality, in particular, what it means to be responsible, to act well towards others, to pursue justice, and to be good. They also frequently focus on the act of reading as an ethical encounter between the reader and the text. Ethical criticism sees the literary text as having a defined social role. At the center of ethical criticism is a concern for the relation between individuals and what it means to treat others well. The notion of the other, in particular, is crucial to ethical criticism by implying that we might build empathy with those of differing experiences, backgrounds, and identities. Emmanuel Levinas, whose work on encounter has been taken up by ethical critics to consider how we meet with those who are different from us. The idea of the face of the other, developed by him in Totality and Infinity, asks us to think about how we not simply meet but also engage in a transformative terms with those with whom we come into contact. The ethico-political is a way to describe ideas that are both ethical and political in character. An ethico-political literary critic will look both at abstract ideas of goodness, justice, and responsibility, and at specific ways in which these ideas are played out in relation to questions of politics such as race, gender, and class. The idea of ethico-political is most associated with the Marxist philosopher Gramsci, whose ideas about ethico-political history developed in the 1930s have been influential in considering how the rule of power, what Marxists call hegemony, is not merely economic but is also concerned with moral questions about justice and how particular groups in society are treated. His idea of the ethico-political asks us to consider both these everyday events and their moral significance, and it is for this reason that it is so useful an answer to the potential limitations of ethical criticism. For those critics who identify a definite shift in literature, the term new sincerity has been used to distinguish such literature from earlier writing. Advocates of new sincerity argue that beginning in the 1980s but rising to prominence in the 1990s, authors began to react against the supposed nihilism, self-referentiality, and playfulness of postmodern literature, with a new writing that did not reject postmodern stylistics but rather mediated these with a return to questions of meaning and truth. These representations are seen to reject the cynicism and irony of earlier postmodern writing with a more earnest tone, hence the reference to sincerity. Three key moments call for an ethically aware criticism. Two of these moments can said to have come from within academic thinking, and the third is a result of a global change. First is the Paul Dayman controversy. After the death of Paul Dayman, a deconstructivist, articles which held Nazi sympathies during Second World War was uncovered. The response of Derrida and other critics to the charges against Dayman can be seen as a possible ethical turn. Voloshin discusses the development of ethical thinking in the work of four significant postmodern theorists, Derrida, Irigaray, Foucault, and Lyotard, in order to complicate this line of argument by suggesting that there exists across post-structuralist and postmodern thinking an ethical concern that precedes the Dayman controversy. Voloshin draws attention to what is less a turn and more of a development in which ethical ideas became more explicit in the work of postmodern writing. Second is trauma theory and Holocaust studies. The response to Dayman needs to be contextualized by the uncovering of information about his past, precisely at the moment when the Holocaust more broadly had become a particular focus of literary and cultural studies. Trauma theory was influenced by the work of Hannah Arendt and Primo Levi. Trauma theory is, however, rooted in attention not only to Holocaust survivors but also to the survivors of other major conflicts such as the Vietnam War, and also to those who have suffered abuse and tragedy. It is not a specific literary field but an interdisciplinary field of study that has become important to literary studies. Trauma theory is particularly interested in how trauma manifests itself both for individuals and for communities, and how it relates to questions of place and history, how it is exercised, and its long-term consequences. This is particularly relevant to discussions of the Holocaust, but also to colonialism and slavery, where the long-term effects of widespread abuse can be seen to be carried out by later generations. By concerning itself with past experiences, trauma theory also has some overlap with what is referred to as memory studies. Memory studies are concerned for the ways in which our relationship to the past is itself a kind of narrative. In a discussion of Holocaust trauma, Hirsch introduces the term postmemory to explain inherited trauma, the idea that trauma can exceed remembrance. At the same time, trauma theory examines memory in the light of postmodern ideas of history, concern for the ways in which individual and collective remembrance is shaped by particular experiences, the identity of the individual and social forces. Third is the response to 9/11. 9/11 tragedy triggered a number of writings that spoke out against the terrorists. In particular, many were seen to make statements against censorship and in favor of creativity as a counter to perceived terrorism and fundamentalism. Transversal poetics. The term transversal is originally a geometric one, meaning a line that intersects two or more lines at different points. To think transversally then is not simply to think across two different perspectives, but to cross one's own point of view with multiple alternatives. In ethical terms, to think transversally is to ask, what might this look like from multiple alternative viewpoints? And indeed, how can one respect multiple viewpoints in one act? This has much in common with feminist ideas of intersectionality, meaning examining the place where alternative viewpoints come together.